Box Green, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Kim.
Okay, so you assert that the push for organic farming are tools used by the global elites to prevent nation building and to maintain their empire. Um, Very interesting. So what you in your documentary you cover Cuba in the first part and then Sri Lanka in the second. Are there going to be more parts?
There are, yes. This is actually based on an essay that I wrote, when was that, about a year or so ago? And yeah, so the first two parts are about Sri Lanka and then Cuba, or Cuba was first and then Sri Lanka. And now Vandana Shiva. And next we're going to have RFK is going to be the star of the next one.
Oh,
So
interesting. Interesting.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because we just watched the trailer and you had a lot of RFK Jr. Are you what is your position on him? Are you thinking he's like a good guy that's fighting the fight, or is he a bad guy in your view?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been tough because I did not like him even before he announced, because I live in New York State and he is notorious for helping shut down Indian Point Nuclear, which uh, increased our energy bills. It's helping destroy our economy. It's helping degrow our economy. So I was
Hmm.
kind of biased about him from the start. And then when he
Okay.
was running, he did come out with a good anti-war message, and I said, okay, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. It's good to have somebody stating these things where we want to remove ourselves from war with Ukraine. But he's kind of flip flopped on that at this point. He's very much pro Israel, and but we don't really have any candidates who are going against the grain in that
Right.
regard.
Right.
So
Right. Okay. Um, so let's start off with Cuba. You say that there was a deindustrialization that happened in Cuba after the fall of the USSR, and that this led to a push for organic farming. And this was viewed. You say that this has been viewed as like like organic farming has been viewed as a success, or like this is like the what we should look towards. Who's saying that? Is that like coming from the left? Is that like who's looking at Cuba and saying this is a model for the future?
yeah, I would say it is mostly the left.
Uh huh.
But what's funny is it does loop back around to the right again, because you do get the same kind of regenerative agriculture, grass-fed beef, things like that. Shop local is very popular with a certain group on the right as well. So I think that these issues kind of cross over left and right, but it certainly is the leftists who are saying, because Cuba is, a communist nation run by a communist government, they say, well, this isn't a form of socialism or communism that works, um, even though what they're going through is basically an energy famine.
Yeah, what's interesting, you just brought up a really interesting point about how this has kind of gone, it's like the horseshoe theory with this, where it starts off, most people associate, I think, organic food and organic farming. Like this is very hippy dippy, like left wing. It's the left wing hippies that are pushing organic, and then that kind of goes into vegetarianism and then veganism, right? It all kind of seems to be lumped together in the same, especially with now like the push of less meat because that's bad for the climate. And so we see this push, and that's viewed as left wing. But you're right in that now it's gone towards the right, because one thing you're kind of asserting, and I want to get into this in your documentary series, is that this on one hand there's this left wing push for organic, but that is being used by these global elites, right, to basically control the food supply. But then the right wing would say, so then you would think automatically the right would say, well, then we reject all of that. But the right isn't. They're not saying, yeah, we want to industrialize farming, because then they look and they see, yeah, but Bill Gates owns all the farms. And so we
Yeah.
don't want this industrialized farming. We also want this kind of local, small, organic or whatever, because we don't want the man controlling. So it's like interesting how both groups are pushing for these organic, deindustrialize. Well, I don't know if the left is pushing for deindustrialize. They're certainly pushing for like different, like organic, right, and climate friendly policies. But it's interesting how both of them are kind of saying the same thing, but for different reasons fundamentally. Although I feel like maybe from the left, they used to say it for the same reasons, that they just wanted to kind of get away from the man. They wanted to be on their own. They didn't want to eat the pesticides. They didn't want to eat the junk that was being pumped into the food supply. And now you've got the right saying that exact same thing.
Right, right.
Where do you think the left has gone with this? Because you're saying that, I mean, how has the left been then co-opted by the global elites?
Well, I think what it boils down to, left, right, it's the same issue. It's just reskinned for different audiences, depending on what appeals to you. I mean, this is basic market segmentation. Some ideas appeal more to some people when they're presented a certain way, and other ideas appeal to another group of people, even
Yeah.
though they're selling you the same thing at the same widget at the end of the day.
It's like war,
What?
right? They sell
Yeah.
war to both sides. They just use different narratives. So on the left, it's we need to
Yeah.
promote democracy and freedom for all people, and that like pulls on
Right.
left-wing heartstrings. And then on the right, they say we've got to protect ourselves, safety. Again, we got to
Yeah.
stop the terrorists before the terrorists come to us, and it's all safety driven. And the left is like humanitarian driven, but it's the same exact. You're selling the same pony in the end, right? It's here's the
Yeah,
war pony,
absolutely. Yeah, and the organic movement started as a right-wing movement.
right
Um,
wing.
the so yeah, yeah. The Soil Association was started by members of the British Union of Fascists. A guy named Jorian Jenks, who was Oswald Mosley's like right-hand man, um, and he worked with Eve Balfour, who was the niece of Lord Balfour of the Balfour Declaration, which I'm sure people have heard of that in
Yeah,
the context of the conflict with Palestine and Israel right now. Um, so, yeah, it started as a right wing movement, a back to the land movement. But then in the 60s, everything kind of got rebranded as the hippie movement. You know, I
good for
think
nature.
because of the pressure of the Cold War and the USSR was kind of seeming more progressive, there was a race to see which country was providing a more free and liberal and better system for people, right?
Hmm.
So I think that's where you get this crazy left, right? That the Congress of Cultural Freedom, have you heard of this? This was a CIA operation to infiltrate left wing thinkers in the West, in the U.S. and Europe, and to get them to hate Russia, to embrace sort of a communist or socialist ideology, but to hate the USSR and to consider them the enemy. So this was kind of like a way to break Americans from camaraderie with Russians, right?
Hmm.
And it went to this total extreme of you get the crazy art movements of Jackson Pollock and just kind of ugliness and undermining of the culture war. So you get people going further and further and further left. To the point where it's just totally nihilistic. Our culture is in a total mess right now. And a lot of people would consider that statement to be kind of right wing. And this is where, the right wingers kind of pick up on some truths here, right? We want social progress without undermining our culture, which is the fabric that keeps society together. So it's kind of like a left and right thing. I hate splitting them apart because I think that it is a divide and conquer tactic. We are
Hmm.
one nation under God, indivisible, right? And we shouldn't say, "Oh, we hate half the country," right?
Right.
That who does that serve? It doesn't serve anyone. And part of being an American is saying, okay, you're allowed to disagree with me, and I want a differentiation. I don't want everyone to be the same.
Right.
So I think we've kind of lost sight of that.
It's so interesting that you say that this started off as the back to the land. I mean, this makes sense to me. I'm from Idaho. It makes total sense to me that the back to the land movement would come from people on the right, historically on the right, who would say we don't want all of this kind of big government intervention or big farming. We want to be independent and individual, and we want to then start growing our own food and being self-sufficient and self-sustaining rather than relying on the government or relying on some big corporation. That does actually ring very true to a more libertarian, I would say, mentality. And what's so interesting is that then you're saying that the left kind of picked up on this in the 60s and the 70s, and they started to do this sort of hippie movement of like, we want to go back to the nature. And it's interesting because, when you think of like green policies and back to nature and organic, and as we were mentioning before, all of those things, environmentalism, we think of the left, like that's all associated with the left. But really, the left in this country has been largely consolidated into the major cities where there's very little of that nature. There's very, they're not the ones necessarily. Well, they're actually not the ones conserving nature. I mean, if you're living, like now I live in Los Angeles. So here in LA, I mean, we're just building. It's concrete. It's destruction of nature in order to deal with the massive number of people, the high population rates, the growth, right? Whereas places like Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, I mean, Colorado, like all of these places are the ones that are actually preserving nature for the country. They're the ones that have like the largest amounts of natural preserves, wildlife forests and parks for everybody in America. So it's really been up to the right wing of the country, I suppose, to maintain the natural resources of the country and the cleanliness. And that's what I always find so interesting is that, I'll listen to a bunch of liberals here in California, for example, and they'll say things like, oh, conservatives on the right, they don't care about nature. They don't care about the environment. And I'm like, I am from Idaho. People care a lot about the cleanliness. They want to camp. I mean, they're the ones camping. They're the ones fishing. They're the ones outside hiking, out in nature. They're the ones who are really, truly enjoying, have the more nature-focused and wildlife-focused lifestyles are the people that live in these sort of right-wing states. So it's interesting that there has been this sort of shift in the narrative. And then what that's done, obviously, is it's then demonized, as you're saying, like we should be one country together. We shouldn't be like divided. But what it has done is it's created like, oh, that's a left-wing thing, so I don't like it, right? Or that's a right-wing thing, so I don't like it, And it's so interesting how they're actually so, like the origins of this, as you're pointing out, are completely rooted in the opposite of what we would think they're rooted in, where we think they come from. We think that they come from this left-wing push. So like Cuba, for example. So tell us more about Cuba. Why did they go into this organic farming movement? Was it because they're a bunch of Marxists and they love and that's why they're wanting to go into organic farming? And that's how that then became associated with left-wing policies?
Yeah, well, I mean, if I could just touch on what you just said, because I thought there were some interesting nuggets in there. I mean, camping, right? What is more American than camping? And I think the love of nature is something that is universal, right? We love our pets, we love our nature, we love our food, right? This is something that most Americans can agree on. And I think that these are the kind of things that can bring our country together,
Mm-hmm.
and that it's not that we want to destroy nature with bulldozing over paradise, right? But we also don't want to degrow and live, in huts, in grass huts. We want to
Right.
have electricity. We want to have creature comforts. We want a growing population. We want it all, right? And I think that we can do it all. And we're divided into either you're this or you're that. But there is another way, and we can actually preserve nature and its beauty and create new things, new ways of living that respect nature and respect human life at the same time. It's kind of an either or thing. And that's where we're really missing the boat here. And I think that's a very American notion that a lot of people, it'll probably resonate with them, right? How can you disagree with that? And
Mm-hmm.
Xi Jinping, he says actually that you can't get rid of growth for the sake of nature, but you can't get rid of nature for the sake of growth. You have to have both. You need a balance of these things. And that is, I think, a very American idea. And I think this is why China is actually surpassing us, because they're taking real American ideas, and we
Mm-hmm.
need to take American ideas back, and use them for our own country again.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson show. That's right, this is just a clip. If you want the full show, you can go to KimIversonShow.com and you can watch Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern for about 1 hour. It's totally free. Check it out, KimIversonShow.com. Thanks for watching.